Billy Napier is back as Florida's head coach, or he will be back for 2025. That was announced just a little bit ago, about an hour ago. Of course, it happened during my live stream, the actual show from earlier. It happened literally as I was recording it, and as soon as I published it to Spotify, or was about to, it comes out, and now here we are. So I decided may as well do an emergency stream for this. Won't be too long, but just to give my initial thoughts on this and some reaction. I could have very easily just saved this till the Tuesday show. By that point, it's old news, so why would I spend a lot of time talking about it on Tuesday? We can do it now as a little extra. So it's a 4 verticals extra edition, if you will, or emergency pod, whatever you want to call it. It's very interesting. So I want to break this down as to why this is happening, or how did this happen, and why is this happening, right? So the how, the why. Sort of, I guess, to start this out, my surprise level on this is, actually, before I do that, I'm going to check here and see if we are actually live. I should have checked this a little bit beforehand, but excuse me, this is live streaming on YouTube. Okay, so we are live. Is this on? Okay, so I am live. Okay, the sound's working. Again, this is sort of a mix, if you will, reaction, if you will, sort of a very gobbledygook live stream. But excuse me for that, but before I did that, sort of the how, or my surprise level as to how surprised am I that Billy Napier is keeping his job. Not too surprised. As I mentioned on the show earlier when I was doing my upset alerts, talked about Texas versus Florida, and how I mentioned, and I was mentioning this multiple times, I'm not the only one who's brought this up, but I'm not surprised because the team hasn't quit, which sort of, I guess, relates to the how. Like, how did this happen? How was this decision made? Or I guess sort of like how and why was this made? Well, because the team's not quitting. The team has not quit. You've seen it in the scores. You've seen it in the wins. They beat Kentucky. They beat UCF. They were competitive against Georgia. They were competitive against Tennessee. And the team has not quit. Now, that's kind of important because you've seen teams in the past go to, like, Gene Chizik and Auburn is a good example. That team quit pretty much towards the end of the 2012 season. The first part of that season, by the way, for Auburn under Chizik is last year. They were somewhat competitive, right? Competitive against LSU, Clemson, Mississippi State to a certain extent. Then the wheels really started to fall off towards the end of the year when it looked like things were lost. And if you're a Florida fan, a more recent example of a team quitting is Dan Mullen. And 2020 and 2021, that team basically quit. Well, 2020 they quit after the shoe game against LSU. They quit. For all intents and purposes, they quit because Dan Mullen was looking for a way out. Want to go to the NFL, interview for the Jets job. You should. That's all public by now. That's not old news. So he returns. Dan Mullen does, and he basically just is like a senior in high school. He's like, okay, whatever. I'm leaving anyway, so I can sort of basically do whatever I want. And I was going to leave anyway, so I shouldn't be here. So I may as well just coast. And that's kind of what he did. The team quit, sort of reflective of the attitude of the coach. You saw what happened towards the end of 2021. That's how we got to Billy Napier being the coach here at Florida. Well, this Florida team this year, even with the results of Texas A&M and Miami, they're not quitting. Like, they're not losing these games by 50 or so points. They're still pretty competitive. And to my knowledge, even within that building, there's no evidence of them quitting. There's no friction within the locker room. There is no toxicity going on from the players. Like, they're still, if I look at the schedule right now, as I'm doing this kind of live, again, a very makeshift show here. So again, forgive me if you're listening to us on the podcast version of this, this will be on Spotify separately. This is kind of a redundant, like, it doesn't really matter. But they're 4-4 right now, and their wins are against Mississippi State, UCF, and Kentucky, at least within the FBS realm. You may look at it and say, well, duh, they should be beating this team. That's exactly right. They should. In a year where they're having to tell Florida and Billy Napier, having to tell the toughest schedule in America, you're winning the games you should be winning. UCF, Mississippi State, and Kentucky. So doing that, being 4-4 right now at this point, it's actually pretty impressive. And this is something that I've echoed, Josh Pate has echoed, that a Florida team that goes 8-4, 7-5, or even 9-3, if that was even on the table still, would be extremely impressive. Like, Billy Napier would be on my ballot for SEC Coach of the Year. That's pretty impressive, given what the schedule looked like back in let's just say summer and spring. Obviously, some of those teams are different. Just talking to Mark Stoops earlier on the main show earlier. I mean, obviously that team is not what we thought it would be, or they've been significantly worse in expectations or performing worse in expectations. It's just a tough schedule, and what they're doing and how they're performing so far in a tough schedule, being competitive with Tennessee. That was a close game, obviously. That was an overtime game. Competitive against Georgia. Like, the scores don't lie to you that the team is not quitting. If they were quitting, the Georgia game would have been a massive blowout. Tennessee would have been a massive blowout. Mississippi State would have been a very close game. UCF would have been a loss. So that tells me, and that other folks in the industry have echoed this, the team is not quitting. So, like, Bill Napier, like, what? Like, just because you're winning games right now and they could finish 6-6, like, what, a trapdoor is going to fly underneath his desk in his office and fall into the gates of hell? Like, no, that's not going to happen. As long as the team is not quitting. They're not quitting, so therefore Bill Napier's coming back next year. So that's sort of, from the administrative standpoint, why Bill Napier is coming back. They're not quitting. The team's not, giving up on the season, and they shouldn't be. Even regardless if any postseason or meaningful postseason goes out the window, who cares about that? They're playing football. All these players don't have all these seniors in this Florida team. They're not going to be, most of them are not going to the league, to the pro league. So this is the last time most of them will be playing college football, and so they have to make the most of it. It's hard to explain this to a casual fan or a general public fan, but it's really, that's what it boils down to. Because of that, most of these guys aren't going to the league. Most of them are not going to be NFL players. So this is the last time they'll play organizational football, unless they go to, like, I don't know, the XFL or whatever the other alternative league is. So that matters to some of these players, and this is the last time they will be playing college football. As a fan, you'll have more seasons with the team because you'll still be around, hopefully. As a fan, because they'll probably still be around more than they will, because unfortunately, those players, like I mentioned, will graduate and move on. So now the other side of this is sort of the Florida fan version, Florida side of this, the fan side of this, because the administration part, okay, the team's not quitting, recruiting's doing okay, I guess. You can look at it that way as, okay, the team's not quitting, sure, we're going to get some momentum with some wins now, because if Florida State is garbage, some of the other teams that you're beating up on like you should be, okay, that's a decent enough argument. At least I think that's a decent enough argument, and I think that's, again, from an administrative standpoint, that's why Florida's not firing Billy Napier, and that's why he's coming back, because you're performing a lot better than, or at least you're projected to perform a lot better than what the projected win total was from, like, places like FanDuel, DraftKings, and whatnot. I think you had it like at 4 wins, so you've already surpassed that. But from a Florida fan perspective, I can imagine right now, and I haven't looked this because I don't know if you really need to know this, but after recording my show, I went for a quick walk and came back, and I decided I should just get on here and do this quick little live stream and do a little podcast, emergency pod. The Florida fan reaction to me is probably, if I had to assume, because I haven't looked at this throughout Twitter, probably pretty negative right now. I'm sure a lot of fans aren't happy. I'm sure the temperature is not good right now. It's pretty warm in terms of feelings about this. And I understand that, right? I mean, bringing back Bill Napier doesn't really, as a fan perspective, and I'm not a Florida fan, but if I were a fan of Florida Gators, if I lived in, I don't know, Gainesville, Yulee, Florida, those areas, up there in that part of the state, and even throughout the state, yeah, I wouldn't feel good about Bill Napier coming back, because he was on the hot seat, but now bring him back. But then again, you have to look at this from an administrative standpoint. Again, the players aren't quitting, and the team's not quitting, and they're performing a lot better against a schedule that everyone was touting, and still is, the toughest schedule in America. Oh, by the way, too, if you did fire Billy Napier, it's another administrative angle, I guess. If you fire him, the next coach you're bringing in is going to have to tout yet again the toughest schedule in America, and you may ask yourself, well, Josh, why is that the case? The SEC schedule for Florida is the same as it is this year, but the locations and venues are going to change because it's the reverse version. So, for example, you play Texas A&M at home this year. Go there next year. Tennessee, play them at home. LSU on the road. Ole Miss, same thing on the road. So the schedule is going to be exactly the same. It's just the venues and locations will change. I don't know. In their non-conference, I guess Florida State, same. I guess they play UCF again. But you would have to bring in a new head coach into another tough environment, another tough situation, because you're having to bring in a new coach into a really tough schedule, and they're going to lose a lot more games again next year too. But there's also the hope factor too for a Florida fan. Again, I understand a lot of you guys aren't happy right now. I'm sure a lot of you are probably pissed that Bill Napier is coming back, and I'm sure a lot of you are probably looking at the Les Miles situation from a couple years ago. You know what I'm talking about. Les Miles, and towards the end of his tenure at LSU, things were getting stale for the most part. 2015 happened, started out 7-0, were ranked like top 2, top 3 or whatever. Lost to Bama, lost to Ole Miss, lost to Arkansas. Things started we're starting to slide on the field. Results and recruiting weren't good enough. Miles, reports and theories and rumors and leaks are coming out that there were plans in place for him to get fired. Then they beat Texas A&M. He stays, and then a year later, they're just delaying what the final result was going to be. That he was going to get fired. I can't guarantee you that's what's happening here. I think that's a very interesting argument. Not argument, but I guess sort of argument, right? Like a very interesting scenario there. Hey, is this a Les Miles situation where you're just delaying the inevitable? I totally understand that. I don't personally think that's happening here. And again, I know it's very hard to sell Billy Napier right now. Even Scott Strickland, the AD there, he's also in some hot water too. And look, if Bill Napier would have gotten fired, if he didn't come back, Strickland's gone too, because he's hired him. He also hired Dan Mullen. Both those coaching hires went down the drain pretty fast. Or at least in Mullen's case, it went down the drain. And he got ugly towards the end. With Napier would have been ugly too. So I get that. I get that as a Florida fan that you're not happy right now. But then again, there's hope for the future, right? You got DJ Lagway coming back. You also have, again, while you are toting a pretty tough schedule, you also have to understand that Ole Miss is going to be a very different team next year. Florida State going to be a very different team next year, both on the field and off the field, with how bad they're going to be this year. So there's hope there. It's a little bit different than Les Miles. With Les Miles, there was just a lot of staleness. There was no excitement going on. The team looked very dreadful. There's hope there, and a lot of it is tied to DJ Lagway. And yes, I know he's not healthy right now, but as mentioned earlier when we did the upset alert for Texas and Florida, the power ratings world has Florida as a team listed 1 through 25. They're a good team when he's in at quarterback. They're favored by a lot of other teams. They're favored over, maybe not USC is not a good example, because I think in most power ratings they're just below USC, but still, they're in that realm of they're favored over most teams. They're favored over teams like Auburn, Arkansas, Texas Tech, things like that. So it's not from power ratings where I know it doesn't make any sense what I'm trying to say there, but there's still hope there. And with DJ Lagway being healthy, Florida is a top 25 team in power ratings. And for the future, that's still builds, because if DJ Lagway's still there, there's hope there. And I think Florida's going to be very attractive in the portal too, especially if Napier makes some changes. Though I will counter argue that argument that people are going to make, saying, okay, well, if Bill Napier is still there, he make some changes, obviously. Well, it's not that obvious, because from people who I listen to, like Josh Pate and the Cover 3 guys to a certain extent, the staff that Bill Napier has, not just coordinators, it's not just that, it's the people you don't know. The general managers, the recruiters, the nutritionists, the strength and conditioning, the PR people. Those are, from what those industry types have heard, that they've shared to us, the public, a lot of folks believe that those other positions you don't know about or you don't care about because you're just a fan. You care more about who's Florida's OC and who's Florida's DC. The positions you don't know about, at least from an organizational standpoint, again, the nutritionist, strength and conditioning, positions like that, those are very good people in those positions there. And the thinking was, if Bill Napier for some reason wasn't coming back, whoever was inheriting that job, if it was open, now it's time to open because Bill Napier's coming back, the new coach would have inherited a very good situation organizationally. So that's not the problem with Bill Napier in Florida. That's never been the problem there. They have very good people and very, very, very good positions that you don't know about because you don't care about them because you're just a fan. You're not like me, who, while yes, I haven't interned at a football team, but I have done intern positions at university departments that a lot of folks, even students, don't know about. So I know that sounds I know it doesn't make any sense, but again, organizationally, Florida's fine. They have very good people within the recruiting realm, nutritionist, strength and conditioning, they're all there. And if you don't believe me, go ask people like Josh Pate, who has been there before. He's been very vocal about it. I'm sure he'll be doing a show here soon because as I'm recording this, he's doing this show early again. So I guess that's a permanent change, I guess, for his show. I don't know, man, whatever. It doesn't matter of time, but he'll echo my same sentiments when he talks about Bill Napier on his show in a little bit. Organizationally, they're fine. At the head coach position, yes, there's things that Bill Napier needs to change about himself, but that's something that he can do in the offseason and maybe work some things out. But the bottom line is, as I end this stream and end this podcast, as I'm recording this book, again, this will be on Spotify as well. Bill Napier's coming back. There's hope. The team's not quitting. Clearly, the administration is not seeing that, and they feel confident enough to how Billy's been navigating, or at least how he's been able to navigate, how he's been able to, traverse this negativity and toxicity. It's been pretty good. And they're 4-4 right now. They're not quitting, as I've been mentioning. And I continue to hammer that because, again, a lot of Florida folks are continuing to tell me, oh, man, the team's still terrible on that. Well, they're not quitting. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. They're not quitting. They're still winning games. Like, what? So what? They go 6-6, and you still want them fired? Tell the administration that because they're unless I'm seeing something a lot different than you guys are. And I don't know. It's just, I think in general, as I end this, I think Florida fans, as a fan, again, I understand why you guys aren't happy about this decision probably. I'm sure you're not happy. I'm sure there'll be a ton of videos from Florida fans saying, oh, man, this is a horrible decision and whatnot. I totally disagree. I think them keeping Bill Napier around is the right move. The team's not quitting. This is not Dan Mullen. This is not another example or example people also bring up is Brian Harsin in Auburn. This is totally different than Brian Harsin in Auburn. Not the same thing. I don't want to hear people saying that. That's complete BS if you're comparing Brian Harsin and Billy Napier. No, they're not the same exact same thing. Brian Harsin was a compromise candidate. Billy Napier was not. Billy Napier was Florida's number one option, and they ended up hiring him while as Brian Harsin, and that coaching search was a total disaster. So heck no, that's a BS comparison. I don't want people throwing that around at all whatsoever. Billy Napier is a much better recruiter than Brian Harsin is. Let's just be fair. Florida has recruited fairly well. Billy Napier is better organizationally, and the team's not quitting. The team basically quit on Brian Harsin a couple years ago when he was at Auburn. So don't give me that crap saying that Billy Napier and Brian Harsin are the same type of coach. They're not. And it clearly shows the administration feels confident enough to bring him back. So that's where I know I got a little fired up there, but as someone who's pretty close to Auburn and knows people who are investing in Auburn, it just frustrates me when people compare Billy Napier and Brian Harsin. It's not the same thing. I can go on for a whole hour here and explain why. But I just told you, the team's not quitting like it did under Harsin. Organizationally, it's a lot better. But again, with strength and conditioning and nutrition and recruiting and everything, it's still pretty organized, unlike it was under Harsin. So I don't know what to tell you. They're not the same thing. Not to mention, Blaine Napier is not an outsider. He was their first choice, yada, yada, yada. I can go ad nauseum to make a file a defense for Bill Napier saying he's not Brian Harsin. Anyway, I'm just getting ahead of it before it comes, and I'm sure it's been out there for a while too, that comparison. But anyway, want to get this out there real quick. I know it sounds like I'm just rambling on, but I need to get my thoughts out somehow. Again, the team's not quitting for Florida. Clearly, that's a reason why they're keeping him. They have DJ Lagley coming back next year, more than likely. I think very likely he'll be back. It's shown clearly through power ratings that's a very good team when he's healthy. And I think it showed a little bit versus Georgia in the last few weeks as well that this is still a good team. There's still talent there. The DJ is a very talented player. You'll bring him back next year. If Napier can keep it well organized, the organizational standpoint, the staff organized and whatnot, and keep them intact, a very good staff, then they should be good to go next year. And I think next year for Florida, there's hope there. I know a lot of things I know a lot of the fans on Sierra right now. I know a lot of people think it's like, the College Bowl 25 dynasty mode where it's like, oh man, this team sucks. I'm going to start over a new file. That's not real life. The video game has no consequences. This does have consequences. So if you fire Billy Napier, if they went this route, DJ's probably transferring. He probably goes to, I don't know, Texas A&M probably, because that's one of the schools I was heavily pursuing him. You lose a lot of that recruiting class. You put so much into disarray and so much chaos that, yes, you bring out a new shiny new object. I don't know, could have been anyone. Let's just say it would have been Lane Kiffin. the schedule is still tough. You don't change the schedule. It's not like in college football 25 where you can change your non-conference schedule and you can start over on your. That's not. It would have been a disaster even if you would have brought in a new head coach. Again, you would have had the transfer portal. We'll have to zombify a recruiting class. I think them keeping Bill Napier was a smart move, and I totally support it. I know you Florida fans won't support it. I don't know. I mean, if you guys look, I understand. Look, if I was a fan, I get it, right? There's no, I don't know. It's tough to really make an argument or to have an argument and try to penetrate you guys, at least your minds, because a lot of you guys just assume Bill Napier is a dead man walking. I don't think he is. I don't think we're seeing the same team. And it just frustrates me that a lot of folks were advocating for him to get fired. And look, we get 12 versions of a team every single year. Josh Pates mentioned it, that you get 12 versions of a team every single year. So the version of Florida you saw versus Texas A&M and versus Miami wasn't the version of Florida you're going to get come right now where we are in November, for better or for worse. And I think for better, the team's not quitting. And I think administration, Florida Scott Strickland clearly sees that. And that's why they're not letting him go. So unless you want the alternative and it being complete chaos and the transfer portal and schools going poaching your roster and DJ Lagway goes to Texas A&M, if you wanted that, then fine. Then that's the world you want to live in, then fine. But Strickland made a really good choice here. I think this is a good move. Look, next year is next year, but at least for this year, keeping that recruiting class together and keeping this team together, and the fact they haven't quit yet, I don't have any problem with it. So if you're new here, no, again, this sounds very disorganized and very much like a rambling on here, but I just had to go live. I think this is a big story. I didn't want to say this until Monday or Tuesday or whatever, and at that point, it's old news. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's free. Nothing happens. I don't send you emails or call your phone or whatever. Subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Twitter at @4forts_pod. And subscribe to the podcast feed too on Spotify as well, Fort Verticals Podcast. So until Tuesday, I can finally say this. Again, this is an emergency podcast, very coupled together. I know it sounded like I was rambling a lot, but I just had to get my thoughts out there. And hopefully you guys can make sense of it. Again, just to wrap this up, I think it was the right decision to keep Billy around. I know a lot of Florida fans won't like it, but look, from an administrative perspective, I don't think firing him would have been a good move. And I totally support this. But you Florida fans will think a lot differently than I will, but that's okay. And we can disagree. We can agree to disagree. But again, the Brian Harsin comparisons I think are crap. I will repeat that again. But yeah, just had to get my thoughts out. Again, Bill Napier will be back as Florida's head coach. No surprise. I think that was probably the right move. So I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Enjoy the games. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.